Welcome to the podcast of Brothers of Many Words. I'm your host, Robert Pride.
You still said it.
Man,
All right. And I'm your co-host, King Mackie. Good to see y'all brothers tonight.
Special guest Christopher Wilkins.
And we got Corey Hill, y'all.
Corey Hill, how's everybody doing today? How was everybody's week so far? Well, the week is over. That's
Wonderful.
another one.
Yes.
It's good to go.
Yes.
Everything's good. Yes, sir.
Loving life.
Hey, looking forward to the next week.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So, before we get started here, I'm going to shed a few words of positivity here, a little bit of inspiration. And this right here is an ancient Egyptian proverb that I'm going to read this from.
Okay.
And so it goes. It is very hard to leave the things we have grown used to, which meet our gaze on every side. Appearances delight us, whereas things which appear not make their believing hard. Evils are the more apparent things, whereas the good can never show itself into the eyes, for it hath neither form nor figure. Thought that was very good. Thought that was a
I
very good
like that.
proverb
I
right there.
like that.
Yes,
I
sir.
like that.
Okay, so the premise of tonight's podcast. So on Sundays we do a book club, and so this year's topic will be the origins of Africa. And the origins of Africa are deeply rooted in the continent's role as the cradle of humanity. All modern humans, Homo sapiens, share a common origin in Africa, as supported by genetic, fossil, and archaeological evidence. This subject is very powerful, very explosive, passionate, and absolutely very energetic as well. So, the purpose of our podcast is to have open discussions on various subjects by way of reading books and articles related to the topics picked, which would allow us to discuss, review, debate, and enlighten ourselves along the way, as well as those who wish to join us on this beautiful journey.
Yes,
So,
sir.
the book that we're going to be reading today is, can you see that? Introduction. Can you see that pretty good? Put the light
It's a
on.
little glare. It's a little bit of a glare.
Let's see. Is that better? Let's take out the glare. There we go.
Oh, there you
There
go.
we go. Introduction to African Civilizations, written by Mr. John G. Jackson. And so, give a little bit about Mr. Jackson. Is an American Pan African historian, lecturer, teacher, and writer known for promoting Afrocentrism, atheism, and exploring the African origins of civilization and major religions. Active from the Harlem Renaissance onward, he authored influential like Introduction to African Civilizations, Man, God, and Civilization and Christianity Before Christ. He lectured widely, collaborated with leading black scholars, and challenged centric historical narratives. So that's just a little bit of info on Mr. Narrative, um, on Mr. Jackson himself. So what we're going to do here is each of us have read a chapter, and so each person is going to give a summary of what they read, and when they get done, we'll if the rest of us have thoughts or suggestions or questions on what has been said, we'll discuss it for a few minutes after that. But with that being said, the introduction is on Mr. Harut.
All right, brothers. Let's get this going. I want to point out something, and before the introduction of this book, and this book states, Mr. Jackson states at the beginning of this book, he says, "This book I dedicate to everybody with an African ancestor, the whole human race." So I thought that was important to speak up front so everybody understands where we're coming from on that. Okay. All right. So with your introduction, today's discussion asks a fundamental question, right? Who defines the origins of civilization? And perhaps more importantly, what happens when Africa is removed from that story? Okay. I want to start with the Western framework of modern history. Let's begin with two influential historians. The first is going to be R&R Palmer, full name Robert Roswell Palmer, born 1909 and passed 2002. His field is European intellectual and political history. He is known for writing one of the most widely used Western civilization textbooks in the 20th century. His key contributions are specialized in the age of the Democratic Revolution, the 18th century through 19th century, argued that the American and French revolutions were part of a broader Atlantic-wide demographic transformation. He emphasizes constitutionalism, Enlightenment thought, and political reform movements. Some of his major works is The Age of the Democratic Revolution. He has 2 volumes. This work reframed an American and French Revolution as an interconnected events rather than an isolated national story. Influence. Palmer shaped new generations of students, the Enlightenment and the French Revolution, and the development of modern democracy. He was associated with institutions like Princeton University and later Yale University. Okay, another gentleman, Joel Colton. His book is A History of the Modern World, shaped generations of university students in the United States. Palmer emphasized democratic revolution, liberal political theory, and ideology development of modern Europe. Colton later updated the work to include the World Wars, the Cold War's social and economic modernization. Together, they represent elite Western academic training and liberal demographic worldwide. The book became a gold standard, but it also reflected a central assumption, and that assumption was that modern political freedom is largely a European achievement. That framework shaped how modern history was taught for decades. And why this matters, Palmer and Colton helped shape the traditional Western civilization narrative that many Americans studied, learned. They learned Greece, they learned Rome, Christianity, the Renaissance, Enlightenment, revolutions, and then modern democracy. Their framework emphasized the political development and demographic institutions, sometimes criticized being Eurocentric, minimizing Africa and Asian and non-Western civilizations, framing history as a progression toward Western liberal democracy. Okay, so they were basically the fathers of the Western civilization narrative. Okay, and so what I want to go to next, based upon his introduction, Mr. Jackson does a really good job as, bringing an understanding of maybe where confusion, or I would say a bias came from when it comes dealing with Africa and Asia. And then he kind of goes into where they find their evidence that Africa held a intellectual civilization as well. Okay, so on this particular subject, this one is called the psychological condition. Okay, Cantu Cullen, she was the author that Mr. Jackson mentioned in his book. So now we're shifting from textbooks from Colton and Palmer to more of a poetry. Okay, Colleen, in poems like Heritage, Colleen wrestled with something deeper than race. He explored the word Negro, not as a color, but as a condition shaped by slavery, exile, culture, amnesia, and disconnection from African origins. If Africa is erased from world history, then identity becomes fractured. And I would say, just in my opinion, we kind of see that fracture, today in our Western society. And so let's go to more the intellectual counter tradition. Okay, so next comes a scholar who challenged the dominant narrative. His name is Richard B. Moore. Moore insisted that reclaiming African history was political work. For him, history was tied directly to liberation. Another gentleman involved with this is William Leo Hensbury. At Howard University, Hensbury taught African civilization decades before it was academically fashionable. He argued that Africa was central to early civilization. Egypt must be understood in African context, and human origins and early state formation required African analysis. Okay, and again, like I said, these are just key points, but also authors that Jackson, I would say, summons in this book and through his introduction to give some backbone to what he's stating further down the book. Okay. Now, this name right here, I know I'm beating it up, and I apologize. Okay, but I believe it's Chika Anta Diop. Okay,
Yeah.
in the nations of the Black Africa and their culture, Diop made a scientific case that ancient Egypt was a Black African civilization. Culture continuity linked Nile Valley societies to wider Africa, and European, emphasis or minimized African performance. This is what I would say. Diop moved the discussion from emotional to data, linguistic, and archaeological archaeology. All right. So meaning that, instead of the book being emotional, they used data to back up what they were stating. A statement that they made was, this was not protest, this was method. Okay. But further going on, the classic record. Okay. So long before modern debates, ancient writers recorded African iniquity. Herodotus described Egypt as a dark-skinned and knowledge African cultural influence. Diodorus Siculus, all right, and Chris might know a little bit better than me, but recorded Ethiopian traditions claiming they were the most ancient people. Civilization flowed from south to north, and Egypt inherited religious and political forms from Ethiopia. He did not invent these claims, he transmitted them. Okay? So again, I'm just going over certain authors and philosophers and historians in the introduction of the African civilization, okay, by by Mr. John G. Jackson, okay. Here's another professor, Professor Heron and Trade Power, Aaron Herman Luigi Heron, an historical researcher into the politics, intercourse, and trade of the principal nations of iniquity. Heron argued Egypt depended heavily on African trade. Gold, ivory, incense, and manpower came from the south. Control of African trade routes meant political dominance. Okay, he treated Ethiopia and Nubia societies as geopolitical actors, not myths. Okay, this was an early 19th century scholar, and he quietly disrupted Eurocentric assumptions. Okay, which again is what Mr. Jackson is intended to do here. Okay, now going further down the book, I've read about this tribe several times, and I've almost become somewhat possessed with this tribe, is what I would say, because they stood their ground, and they actually fought the British for over 100 years. Okay, 100 years. All right. So, so I want to talk about the Ashanti Wars. Okay, and the Fanta Confederation and Jaja of Obuo, often called the father of Nigeria economic nationalism. Okay, so let's start with the Ashanti Wars. Okay, the Ashanti Wars was from 1824 to 1900. The Ashanti Wars were a series of conflicts between Ashanti Empire and the British Empire in what is now called Ghana. Ashanti were one of the most powerful states in West Africa, founded in the early 18th century under Osei Tutu. Why the wars happened? This core issue was control of trade routes to the coast, gold exports, and political dominance over southern coastal states. The British wanted secured coastal trade, Ashanti wanted to maintain island sovereignty and economic control. All right. The key conflicts between Ashanti and the British were First Anglo-Ashanti War was 1824 to 1831, right? The British suffered early defeats, including the death of Governor Sir Charles McCarthy. Number two, Third Anglo-Ashanti War, 1873 to 1874. British forces captured and burned Kumash. All right. War number three, War of the Golden Stool, in 1900, sparked when the British governor demanded to sit on a sacred golden stool, the spiritual symbol of Ashanti unity. So when a general asked to sit on this particular stool, it offended the Ashanti, and again, war began with that concept. Okay. The resistance was led by Yai Ashantiwe, one of the most famous female military leaders in African history. And I thought that was an important fact too, as well. So the outcome, as we already know, by 1901, the Ashanti Empire was annexed into the British Gold Coast colony. But the Ashanti Wars demonstrate centralized African state power, military sophistication, and cultural resistance rooted in spiritual sovereignty. Okay, the Ashantis, that's my heart right there. I could go a little deeper into that, but I'm gonna stop right there. Okay, and then now we want to go into something else that I thought was significant in the introduction of the African civilization by John G. Jackson, was the Fanta Confederation. That was 1868 through 1873. Okay, so along the southern coast of modern Ghana, another experiment unfolded. The Fanta Confederation was formed by the Fanta state, who sought protection from Asante expansion, increased British. They didn't want British control, and a unified African political structure. So why it was significant? The Confederation created a written constitution, a central governing council, unified army, and taxation system. This was not a tribal alliance. It was an attempt at constitutional government. It represented one of the earliest African efforts at modern political federation. So basically what that showed was that, what John G. Jackson is stating in this book is that, African tribes weren't just savages. They understood and had certain systems that they followed by. And so I think that's important to understand that through the Ashanti Wars, when fighting off the British for over, 75 years, it allowed them to be, like, again, their military was sophisticated in order to do that. They had to be strategic in a mindset, and they had to be, be able to, understand what they were dealing with as well. Even when it comes to the Fanti Confederation, knowing that an African group or tribe was beginning to create a constitutional government. They were definitely experimenting with it if they just hadn't had it done yet. And then two, or going to number three, is Jaja of Obo, economic nationalism in the Nigerian Delta, or Niger Delta. So now we move east to the Niger Delta. Okay, Jaja was born around 1821. Jaja rose from enslavement to become ruler of the kingdom of Obu in present-day Nigeria. Okay, what made Jaja different? Jaja understood critically. European merchants were shifting from slave trade to palm oil commerce. Palm oil was essential to Britain's Industrial Revolution. It was used in soap, lubricants, and machinery. So what Jaja did, he positioned himself and military as a middleman power controlling in interior trading zones or routes. He insisted that Europeans must trade on African terms. that they could not bypass African brokers and price would be regulated locally. This was an economic sovereignty. British response, British firmly wanted free trade, meaning direct access to producers. And then also in 1887, the British tricked Jaja into boarding a ship under negotiation pretense. He was arrested, exiled, removed from power. But again, the reason why he's considered the father of nationalism is Jaja signified in three things. He defended African economic control. He defended African economic control. He resisted unequal trade treaties, and he insisted on political sovereignty in an era of imperial expansion. He represented an era from an economic nationalism decades before formal Nigerian nationalism emerged in the 20th century. Okay. I thought those three factors were so important to understand, again, about the African tribes and not being savages, but having governments, having a sense of economics, taxation, understanding the roots of building an empire or a kingdom. That was just really stood out to me when it came down to the introduction. Here's just a little bit of reflection. Okay. The 19th century in West Africa was not simply a story of European expansion. It was a contest over who controls trade, who defines sovereignty, and who sets the rules of modern political life. Colonism interrupted these projectors. It did not create them. And I feel like that's significant to understand. Now, here I am going back to other authors that were introduced in the introduction. And here is some understanding of what they stated based upon Africans and their tribes and their lineages. So here it is. Medicine begins in Africa. Now consider medicine. In the evolution of modern medicine, William Osler writes, the first figure of a physician to stand out clearly from the midst of iniquity is Enhotep. Enhotep, architect, scholar, physician, lived nearly 2,000 years before Hippocrates. Osler places the origin of rational medicine in Egypt, not Greece. Africa gained stance at the foundation. So again, here we are, with other authors that are given the same concept of Mr. Jackson, not just stating that Africa is the birthplace of mankind, but it is the birthplace of civilization as a whole. Okay. Here's something else that I thought was very important as well. We have the Bush-Shango, tribe. So we have, okay. So, but anyway, so I again, let me just go to my reflection. So closing reflections is, if we accept that civilization flowed through Africa, trade networks shaped Mediterranean power, medicine began in the Nile Valley, political institutions thrived in Central Africa, identity fractures when history is erased. So then the question is no longer whether Africa contributed. The question becomes, why was it minimalized? And what does restoring that narrative change? Okay, Africa, and then my final line is, Africa is not a footnote of civilization, it is the architect of civilization. I digress.
That's very good, brother. That's very, very good. That's very good. This is very good. It's hard to do that when there's so much information. That
it is.
Just to add my 2 cents. There's so much division today, especially when it comes to the races, and everybody wants to be separate and say things as far as stick to your own race and this and that and the other. But the very first line, the very first thing you said right off the bat, and it caught my attention too. This book is dedicated to everybody with an African ancestry, and that's the whole human race.
And at your ending, man, talking about the narrative was actually, when you first started talking, it's the first point I put down. that I wanted to end after your introduction was Africa is so important to us and our ancestry. And
Right.
I believe that the powers that be in all forms of government in every country wants to deny the fact. I think that's why the European model has been dominating, is because it's hiding the fact, in my opinion, it's hiding ancient history that's buried in Africa, and they don't want us to go looking for it because it's going to provide
Right.
answers that they
Right.
don't want us to know.
Right. Yep. Yep. I do agree. Yeah, I do agree. And it does something again. The psychological approach on this. I know I think that's the psychological condition. You know what I mean? I think that plays a huge mindset into the way people think. And I'll say one more thing, and I'll let it go. They did a particular study with these young students, and it was, I think, ages 13 to 16, and they asked these particular students, just basic questions. And when they took this test, they failed the test. But then when they were giving some insight about their African lineage and certain African philosophers and scholars, they read about 46 weeks. And when they did that, they went back and took this test. And this test, they aced the test because it was something like a psychological condition of them believing they were something less when they were a little bit more. And it gave them the oomph or whereabouts or the will to overcome their little trauma to be great at something. So I think that goes a long way in how people think. And it would carry us a long way if we continue to think a little stronger in that perspective.
Absolutely. That's a great point, bro. All right. Chapter 1.
All right.
Okay, so all right, gentlemen, I got chapter 1, and it's a very interesting chapter, and John, Mr. Jackson does a really good job on bringing out all the different scholars throughout time and throughout some of the things that we learned in school as well. So what he does is he starts out with Archip James Usher, which was an Irish scholar. An Irish scholar who in 1650 he wrote this book called The Annals of the Ancient and the New Testament. And so he figured that he knew how old, in his opinion, that the Earth was, and he said, the Earth began in 4004 BC.
Right.
So this is where it all starts. And so some years later, there's another gentleman, Mr. Lightfoot, which was in Cambridge University. He says that he knows exactly the time, the date, and the time that the Earth. So that's interesting. So like my wife and I was reading this to her earlier, and so we got this thing where we like gonna celebrate on October 23rd, because that's supposedly when the Earth was made, and at 9 o'clock in the morning. So I mean that's interesting. That I never knew that. It's a fun fact. But today we do believe that the world is 4.5 billion years old. But moving along to some of the other scholars that Mr. Jackson brings up is Sir James John, and so Sir James John believed that the sun floated through space, and we was a wandering star, and the gravitational pull force causes the tides, and yada yada yada. And I'm sure we've heard that one before. Okay, so there's another professor called Raymond Littleton, and he believed that that we were one big, the Earth. The sun was one big giant ball, hydrogen gas, and then the stars are called supernovas, and the Big Bang Theory. That's where I got from. That's what we were taught back in the 80s and the 90s in school. The Big Bang Theory, that it just exploded and life came. And if you want to know more about that book, it's called The Modern Universe, and that's by Raymond Littleton. If you want to read more into that one. Moving forward, he brings up some other gentlemen. Yes, excuse me. Okay, gentlemen. Okay, I'm going to my notes. He brings up some other gentlemen. Let me see, Raymond Littleton. Okay, so he brings up brings up Darwin. So we all heard of Darwin. Darwin is the gentleman who the selection. So Darwin has the book The Origin of the Species that was in 1859, and he wrote. I'm sorry. Gotta forgive me on this one. Okay, so Darwin. This is the first time. This is the first time that we hear that life began in Africa, which was to me was from Darwin. Darwin says it, but I think that they kind of start shutting it down. So he says in 1859 in his book, the 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 book in 1859. Excuse me, gentlemen. Well, in 1859, he said he made a comment that the Africa was more than likely the cradle of mankind. Okay, so in moving later on in 1921, there was this gentleman that we just got to reading. This book is called this gentleman is called Albert Churchward. Okay, so Mr. Churchward, we all know him. He was a doctor. He was he was in the Royal Physicians, the Royal Council of Surgeons. He was a Mason. He was an archaeologist, and he was an anthropologist. And that's important because he's esteemed, and he was well educated. And so he wrote the book, and we just got to reading the book on the previous other podcast. And so Churchward was the first one to boldly say that life began in Africa. He was he was the first one to start saying that. He believed. Let's see. Okay, so he was the first one to also believe that the pygmies and the Neolithic Negroes were the ones that came from Africa as well, and he brought a lot of evidence supporting that. Okay, so I got kind of like a brain fog there, Jim. Hold on, let me get back on it. All right, so Mr. Churchward also, whenever he brought this stuff out, they wanted proof. The people from I wouldn't say Europeans, but the English, the English people, his superiors, they wanted proof, and because they didn't believe what he said. So around 1924, in I think it was in South Africa, in a South African like a rock quarry, like a lime company called Northern Lime Company. They were blasting and blasting rocks. So what happened was they found a skull, and the skull they looked at it. He ended up turning it into a gentleman by the name of Raymond Dart. So he turned the skull into Dart. Dart looked at it. Dart instantly wrote a book, and he wrote a paper called "The First South African Man-like Ape." So this is starting the narrative on the real narrative of the life beginning in Africa. So his superiors didn't believe him. So what he did, he got with a gentleman named Robert Broom. He got with this gentleman, and they linked up, and they started to do explorations, and they started to explorations and I can't think about it. Explorations and digging up fossils and stuff. So they ended up getting together. So they showed all this evidence to their superiors and all the experts, and the experts like straight shut them down. So let's see. Okay, so and later on the chapter is bringing up a gentleman by the name of Locke. I'll probably skip it over the first stuff, but Locke was his parents were missionaries, and he was English, and they lived in Kenya, and so he knew the language. He was in with the tribes. he got to know the people, and so when he was about 16, he moved. He went back to England to go to college to be an anthropologist and an archaeologist, and so whenever he came back in like 1929, and they started. He started an expedition to look for to look for fossils and stuff. Let's see. You have to excuse me, gentlemen. I got over here, got fried, man. I got all my notes.
But let me help you out, bro. Can I help you
Yeah,
out?
help me out
Let
here,
me help
man.
you out, bro.
Yeah.
So in dealing with Dart and Broom and Lockley, what they found these skulls that come to be more not Homo sapien but Homo habilities, meaning that they
Right.
had the abilities to make tools. You know what I mean? And so even to this day, it says that in a National Geographic Society, scientists have unearthed evidence that a bone-smashing African ancestor of a man used a crude stone hammer tool 12 million years ago. Okay, this would be 10 million years earlier than previous estimates of the beginning of the tool making on Earth. So again, this kind of goes back to the beginning where, people agreed that Africa, was the birthplace of everybody. But the problem is that they didn't agree that they were civilized. They were a civilization. They didn't believe they could do governments or have tools and this and this and this. So the biggest point about what Mr. Jackson is doing is he's just pinpointing the facts on how these particular scientists found these skulls, but then given to other philosophers or scholars, they denounced
Right,
it
they
because, of
denied it.
course, it
Yes,
doesn't go
yeah.
against the narrative. It doesn't go with the narrative that they needed. So, as a matter of fact, Professor Lockley has an article called the Tariq, Tarikh, 1906, Volume 1, Number 3. And it basically is entitled Man in Africa, the Earliest Beginnings to the Coming of Metal. It was published by the Historical Society of Nigeria by Longman. But again, they're basically stating that, African civilization, they used tools to hunt, to maneuver through life. But again, when you come to the Western understanding, they basically take that out the narrative. Just like Palmer stated,
Sure.
and Milton stated, that, it basically started with Greece and then moved on from there. Some philosophers would give praise to Asia, but they wouldn't give that praise to Africa. So, help my brother out on that.
Very well put, brother. I appreciate you for for finishing that up for me, brother. I appreciate that. Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
But that's the everything that happened in chapter 1. Anybody get anything else from chapter 1?
I think that really
Yeah,
sums it up, man. I don't got anything.
Yeah, that was good.
I'll just say, it's on page 38. So when we read Dr. Finch's book, and right off the bat, how he broke it down from the very substance of the cells and how they were created. So on page
Right,
38, he
yeah.
does the same thing. The first life forms a
Right.
jelly-like substance called protoplasm, and that's I love it about reading because. Yes, we're reading the origins of Africa, but I'm always fascinated of how things always go back to the very beginning, and they break
Right.
it down into the minute details into how life started to where we are now. So I thought that was again,
Right.
it just reinforces, the learning and the growing, for what we're trying to do. I thought that was
Yeah.
fascinating.
Can I add to that, Robert? Can
Sure.
I add to that real quick? I thought I
Yeah, yeah.
compared. I looked up, Edward French because in his book he starts with more plants, and I don't
Right.
particularly know in chapter 1 there was a particular writer who, but anyway, the writer in chapter 1 he starts with more of, like you said, the protoplasm with water. So one starts with plants, and through plants came the jelly, or the protoplasm, but he called it something else. Eureka stems, or Eurekas in Edward Church's book. But in this particular book of creation, they start with like the protoplasm, the blob, jelly-like, but he goes into stating that the vertebrate. I thought that was pretty important
Right.
about, yeah,
Right.
it might have started with plants, it might have started with a blob and jellyfish and sea urchins, but they were just microorganisms, if you would say, in a sense, right? They didn't have like I don't believe they didn't have a nucleus, I believe, right?
No.
But I know for a fact they didn't have a vertebrae. So,
Right.
he even talks about in chapter 1 where when mammals or fish got tired of swimming in the water because it became too crowded, they would literally walk on land and
That's right.
become earth breathing or breathe through their gills, So,
That's right.
when we started watching some of these movies, the Aquaman and stuff like that, it make you start wondering, because they didn't
That's
just
right.
make this stuff up. So anyway, I
That's right.
digress. I just wanted to throw that in there.
That's right.
Well, to add to that, since we're bringing up some of that, I would like to mention, if you look at, we're talking about the origins of man, the amount of chromosomes we have versus the amount of chromosomes apes have. And chimpanzees and gorillas, especially chimpanzees, but in gorillas, we're like 98% identical DNA match. We're like 95%. I know the exact number, but we're very close. But there's some very interesting in the chromosomes. Why apes have 48, we have 46. So we have one less than they do. And current modern scientists have discovered in our chromosome number 2, you understand how DNA is built. DNA is like a strand of information. But on the ends of your DNA, you have what's called a telomere. And the telomere is there to basically protect the DNA. So it can take blunts and hits while it's in your body. And it protects the code of the information in your DNA. And all DNA, it's very simple. I'll try to draw on a piece of paper real quick. It's going to be horrible. But so if you can see right here, you have a line. This line represents a telomere. This is the DNA, and this is the telomere, okay? Now, your telomere protects that DNA, but in chromosome number 2 on humans, we have something a little different, and this doesn't happen in nature. We have a telomere, DNA, another telomere, DNA, and another telomere. So that would look like this, right? So 3 telomeres in one strand of DNA. That represents a fusion of chromosomes. And in the natural world, that is impossible and cannot happen. Scientists today still cannot come up with a reason on how that happened, but we do know that chromosome 2 represents like the things we need for language, our intellect and identity and ego, and that all comes from chromosome 2, the fusion. So just saying, that's just something that's
No,
very
bro,
interesting.
you hit that.
Well, now,
You hit that, bro.
yeah. Well, now, do you know why? You have any idea why that might be?
I mean, in my opinion, if you want to talk about the Anunnaki, maybe some ancient civilization.
Yeah. So, yeah. I just wanted to see if you we'll digress. We'll digress, but I just want to see. Yeah.
That's what's up. Yeah, I was just finna hit on that. But I seen it on Robert's wheels. I seen his wheels. I said, "Nah, he got it."
All right, ready
That's
to dive into chapter
awesome.
2?
Yes, go ahead, brother.
All right, man. So I was given chapter 2, and it's called Ethiopia and the Origins of Civilization. And I want to start off by quoting the book right here at the very beginning, on page 60. Jackson says that the forms of behavior specifically restrict to man are truly cultural activities, and they are listed below. These are 5 basic things you need in civilization. Number 1 is the growing of crops. Number 2, the domestication of other animals. Number 3, cooking. Number 4, weaving of clothes. And number 5, the use of language, which may be defined as the expression of definite ideas by means of the larynx, lips, and tongues. And this is exclusive to civilization. And then the next thing I want to read is a explanation here written by Lord Raglan that Jackson lists. And I think this is good that we need to read this. A society is civilized only if it contains scholars and scientists. The scholar consolidates and clarifies the knowledge which has already been acquired and hands it on to the scientist who thus provided proceeds to experiment and thus to the increase of knowledge. Without the torch of learning, the scientist is reducing to groping in the dark, and without the scientist to use and test the results of his learning, the scholar sinks into a barren pedantry. The scholarship and science, in the widest sense of these terms, are the warp and woof of civilization. And the scientist, no less than the scholar, is dependent upon the written word. Not only must he be able to use the learning of the scholar, but he must be able to record the results of his own investigations. Since then, civilization depends upon scholarship and science, and these depend upon writing. Civilizations can only rise where the art of writing is known. And we find that in Ethiopia. And Jackson explains that in this chapter. So to start, the chapter 2 is trying to answer one big question. Where did civilization come from, and who was the earliest civilized people? Before I get into it, I want to be clear about this. I'm the only light-skinned guy here. You guys are dark-skinned people. I hate the term black and white, yellow, brown, orange. I just despise the term.
He does.
And because we are all one race, we're all brothers and sisters. Where I agree with this in the heart of Jackson's argument is that early Ethiopian peoples played a massive role in building the foundation of civilization. And the later cultures often built on what came before. But I reject the idea of humans being split into superior and inferior races. In my view, we're one human family, one ancestry, and the differences we see are small adaptations, not separate kinds of people. And moving on to the archaic early civilization and foundation, Jackson frames an archaic world of early civilization and old foundation that later civilizations inherit. He lists cultural elements tied to archaic civilizations, including agriculture through irrigation, stone construction and stone carvings, pyramids, rock-cut tombstones and circles, metalworking, pottery, mummification, worship of Great Mother Goddess, rites of human sacrifice tied to agriculture, worship of heavenly bodies, a ruling class structure, sky versus underworld associations, totemism, dual socialization, mother, right, matriarch descendant, and divine kingship, especially emphasized in Africa. Now, the purpose of that long list isn't to prove every detail beyond dispute. It's to argue that civilization has deep roots in Africa, and that many later high cultures may be branches growing out of a much older trunk, which, in my opinion, and as Jackson states, is Ethiopia. Now, in the early chapter, Jackson stresses the scientific sophistication of Mesopotamia, Samaria, and says later cultures were verging on earlier ones. He lights that the prior Sumerian, the Chaldeans, they were stargazers, and they were most likely based off of an earlier Sumerian civilization, which was based off earlier Ethiopian civilization. He highlights that the Chaldean stargazers cultivated a highly advanced system of mathematical astronomy. And he notes that actually before 500 BC, the astronomer Naburianu calculated the length of the solar year with striking precision, 365 days, 6 hours and 15 minutes and 41 seconds. He was only about 26 minutes and 55 seconds too long of an actual year. It's pretty incredible in my opinion. The big claim Jackson keeps returning to is that later Babylonian science made credible use of Sumerian scientific heritage, and that Sumerian culture was ready-made when it first shows up in record, which is actually pretty history. We don't have any proof or evidence that Sumerians were slowly building technology. They just already had it. So they must have acquired it from someone else. And the ancient Sumerians were most likely Ethiopians. He also cites H.R. Hall describing the Sumerians as appearing in the 4th millennial BC, already civilized, living in populous cities, using metal, possessing a complex writing system, and governed by established dynasties. So this argument is that some of the oldest known civilizations didn't look like beginners. They looked like people inheriting, refining, and expanding an even older base. The migrations of Ethiopia and early links. Jackson leans into migration. He links argument that early Babylonians may have passed from Ethiopia to the Euphrates Valley shortly before opening of the historic period. He cites sources claiming affinities between early writing systems in Egypt and points to traditions linking Ethiopia, southern Arabia, and the cities of the lower Euphrates. He also brings in older scholarly descriptions about population mixture in Babylonia and nearby regions, including claims of Cushite blood in Babylonians and painted a depiction of an Elamite king described as black. So right here, we have it that these civilizations were based off the dark-skinned Ethiopians, what they have already developed in the technologies. Now, Jackson is pulling, the scholars disagree, the larger point Jackson is pushing is about influence, migration, and cultural transmission, and not about anyone being better or worse. Then the chapter pivots to India and says that the first great civilization of India was established in the Indus Valley, with major cities like Mohenjo Daro and Hapara. And I may not say that last one correctly, but Jackson highlights how advanced the urban engineering was. They had bathrooms were common, ceramic drains leading to brick sewers running into the streets. He also claims that people domesticated cattle there, sheep and elephants, cultivated wheat and cotton, used boats and carts, worked skillfully in metals, and even had a process for producing rust-resistant irons. That's pretty crazy thinking of how long ago that was.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Wow.
And interesting about these irons that these ancient Ethiopians were creating, it says, then comes the metallurgy note by Professor W.J. Perry. He quoted describing iron in parts of India of such quality it practically constituted as a natural steel. Jackson connects that to the legendary Damascus blade. So the original real Damascus blades comes from steel that was made by ancient Ethiopia. Anyone that's claimed they made a blade since then, it's not a true Damascus blade. It has to come from this steel. This is a true Damascus blade. If the blades were tied to the specific high quality source. Again, you can debate details, but the core takeaway here stands. Early India was primitive. It was city building, engineering, and metalworking at a high level. Then this next part is probably the most interesting part of the chapter for me. It goes into the Crete, the Minoans, and the Greek funnel that's into Europe. Here's the most important threads for understanding Europe. Jackson says that the first civilization of Europe was established on the island of Crete. They call it the Minoan culture. He also says the ancestors of Crete were natives of Africa, a branch of Western Ethiopians who lived in the grasslands of North Africa before the region dried into the Sahara. Now, those lands changed. The chapter says they took to the sea and established a maritime culture in the Crete Islands nearby. At its peak around 1700 BC, the center was Knossos. Jackson described a huge palace complex, 5 stories high, spread over 4 acres, filled with frescoes and mosaics. So these people had a very good civilization. They had art, and whenever you have art, I mean that's right there. That's a civilization. But here's the really cool part. Here's the technology piece that jumped out at me. He describes bathrooms with terracotta baths and advanced drainage constructed with faucets and joints and pipes that in the chapter's telling were not surpassed until modern times, around 19th century.
Oh wow.
This is before Greece, before Rome. He had all of this. Socially, he emphasizes that Knossos had no city walls. People had leisure, music, dance, athletics. Women enjoyed the same rights and privileges as men. something we don't see until Roman times, so this is actually before. Women enjoyed the same rights and privileges as men, and there was no powerful priesthood or no major temple system. Then comes a turning point. Jackson says around 1400 BC, so about 300 years later, this culture was laid in ruins by an invasion of the semi-barbarous groups, Greeks from the north. Let me get a drink here. And this is the big funnel point in this chapter. If the sequence is right, and Greek civilization did not rise out of nothing, it rose after Crete on top of what Crete had already demonstrated. And then the Greek civilization becomes the funnel into Europe, and later Rome builds on Greece. So
Yes.
the Western Ethiopians branched out because the desert dried up. They moved into Crete. They started their own civilization. The Minoans developed this awesome place and this awesome civilization. Then you have the savage Greeks that come down, and ends up defeating them because they don't plan on being attacked. They don't have city walls and stuff. And the Greeks take them over, and they inherit their culture and their civilization, right? And the Greeks starts practicing that, and so all of your, I mean, this even goes into like Atlanteans, that Atlanteans were from ancient Africa, and that whole civilization. But we'll when you get to the end of the chapter. But it's pretty awesome that's where that starts. So Greece picks up that civilization, passes it on to Rome, and so Rome, which is one of the biggest empires in our history, was based off Ethiopia's culture. So the chapter theme repeats here: the later worlds inherit and adapt, sometimes conquers, but it doesn't create in a vacuum. And then we have Totemism and exogamy. In the last pages of the chapter, Jackson shifts into something that feels technical. It's Totemism, exogamy, early social organization. The reason he does this is simple. He's trying to show that early African social patterns tied to the archaic civilization traveled far and left traces. He cites Sir J.G. Fraser on the idea that Totemism is very old and widely found among many savages and barbarous people, and that it's absent from the yellow and red races in Fraser's framing. Jackson explains the classificatory system of kinship, where kinship is reckoned between groups rather than individuals, and under this model, father, mother, husband, wife, son, daughter can apply to the whole groups based on tribal rules. And this is pretty important because this is the very beginning of civilization, which stems from Ethiopia. Fraser is quoting here, arguing that this makes sense if you assume very old systems of group marriage. Jackson walks through the dual organization of exogamy systems. You got 2-class, 4-class, 8-class, and how these systems restrict marriage between relatives. To illustrate, he uses the Calamari of South Australia, laying out phratries, clans, and mating roles, and he argues that Australia becomes an isolated museum where older social systems survive and fossilize. And Jackson's takeaway is summarized as Totemism and exogamy are treated as part of the archaic culture package with roots in Africa, and Australia preserves a cut-off version of it. So when exogamy was migrating, it moved over to Australia, and then it kind of stuck there and it never went anything else. But the exogamy and Totemism kind of converged in Africa and created a more complicated system and better system. And then the very end, he has an appendix, a 2-page appendix on race. The appendix turns into the controversial history of race classification. So the scholars kept changing their categories in this appendix. I won't list them all because there's so many people that was involved in this and give their opinions. We got people talking 4 races, 5 races, 12 races. We go all the way up to 34 races, 6 divisions, 29 races. All kinds of different people with different opinions trying to split up all these things. And there's never an agreement, never one. No one has ever actually came to an agreement on this. It's just people stating their opinions. My takeaway is this where I voice my voice pretty crystal clear. There are human attempts to label and classify, and a lot of it reflects the era and the politics of the people doing the labeling. It's not clean, subtle, or sacred. I agree with Jackson's larger historical thrust that early dark-skinned peoples were central in building the foundation of civilization, but I do not accept the idea of separate human races as separate kinds of people. I believe we're one human race, we share ancestry, our DNA differences are tiny, mostly surface traits like pigmentation and certain facial features. There's no superior group, nobody is more human than anyone else, and in my view, we're all brothers and sisters. Different shades, we're all different shades of the same family. So in closing, Jackson is arguing that the roots of civilization, they run deep into the ancient world of Africa and its connecting regions, and that many later civilizations inherited, copied, and built upon what other people had already created. My final word is recognizing contributions is about ranking human. It's about telling the story honestly without erasing anybody. That's all I got for
Like
chapter
that.
2,
That's
guys.
very good.
I like that.
Very good job. Very good job.
Yeah, I like
very
that,
good
bro.
job, brother.
Yeah, well,
Very good job.
you know, I want to say about that the classificatory system. You know, as we read with Dr. Churchward, you know, in the beginning they were very promiscuous. You know, they got down what they got down. You know, it's what I find fascinating though is that they how did they figure out, you know, to be able to separate into groups and know that this group could not mate with this group, but they had to mate
Right.
with the other group, and then they would
Right.
split and split and split. I just find that
Right.
fascinating because, you know, they couldn't talk. You know, they spoke with sounds at that point, but it just, if they even did that, but I just find it fascinating that they were able to figure that out, you know, not to be able to sleep with the same blood, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the patriarchy, you know, the fact that, you know, where we are right now, when men, we lead, we're authoritative role in our household. We lead, but in these particular times, that was not the case. That was not the case. Matter of fact, I even read even in chapter 2 or 3 where it stated that the father didn't even know that he was even impregnating the wife. Do you know what I mean? Or the woman, and he lived among her bloodline, not with his own. Do you know what I mean? So the fact that you know, women led at that particular time is amazing. I mean, my wife collects the money and holds the money, so I guess she's doing the same thing. You know what I'm saying? So,
Right.
you know,
Yeah, I mean,
it's all the same thing.
originally we see in a lot of civilization, well, the ancient ones, is that it's more, I want to say women was in charge, but it was all evolved around the woman because she's the one that
Right.
was bringing life into the earth.
Yeah.
And so they understood at a very primitive level that that was very sacred and worth protecting. And they would
Right.
to lift the feminine up. And that's, in my opinion, that's a job of a masculine man. We're not
do
better than a
agree.
woman. To me, the woman is better than me, and my job is to protect her and lift her up.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
see that, we see the roots of that, you know, it's built into our DNA from the very beginning.
Right. Right. True. That's true. That's fact.
All right. We're gonna move on to chapter 3, and that'll be on me. So this is the chapter is Egypt and the evolution of civilization, and you know, as some of you have highlighted, you know, there's always well, there seems to be the where civilization started here and civilization started there. However, not acknowledging the elephant in the room, so to speak. So I'm going to read page 93 here, the first paragraph. Several Egyptologists have theorized that ancient Egyptians originally came from Asia, but no evidence has been adduced that would validate this opinion. And the only reason this thesis has been entertained is that it was fashionable to believe that no African people were capable of developing a great civilization. Mr. Geoffrey Parsons, in a scholarly historical work, refers to the culture of Egypt as genuinely African and its origins and development. And so there's also an important text called the Edfu text, was it a source document on the early history of the Nile Valley. And according to this record, civilization was brought from the south by a band of invaders under the leadership of King Horus. This ruler Horus was later deified and became ultimately the Egyptian Christ. The followers of Horus were called the blacksmiths because they possessed iron implements. And no, so through Dr. Churchward, we've read about Horus, and Set was initially the god, and then that was in the south. And as they
Right.
migrated from south to north, Horus became the
Right.
king, and so that was one God, two people, but the same God, so to speak.
Right.
So that's very significant. And so I'm gonna go. Let's see. So from what has been discovered about Egypt, and Chris had touched on this as well, is that Egypt was an already highly advanced civilization, and so just as you know, there is the theory that, and it may be already fact by now, that just as the Romans or the Greeks had passed on to the Romans, the Egyptians were already, who influenced them? Who influenced them? Because they were very highly advanced civilization as well. And as we know, as history, as we go through history, there's always a passing of the torch, so to speak. From one civilization to one civilization to one civilization to one civilization. So I thought that was interesting as well. And as Peru was just talking about the matriarchal and the patriarchal, which, as we have Mr. Churchward again, he's a very great author, very great historian. And so in the beginning, it was the woman, motherhood was the leader. You hear the echo?
Mm-hmm. I was just about to tell. I was a bit. Yeah.
It's somebody's mic. It's a microphone.
Man,
Like, yeah, two microphones are on, I think.
Yeah. Block keep pushing through. I think it's gone now. But in the beginning, it was it's back again, the matriarchal. So in the Egyptian family, it was matriarchal, meaning the wife ruled the day. And so I quote here, the husband by the terms of the marriage agreement appertains to the wife, and it is stipulated between them that the man shall obey the woman in all things. And that's what it was in the beginning. But I believe it was in a solo code, as we have read, through rituals and ceremonies, that changed and how it switched over from motherhood to fatherhood to where we are today. But it was not always that way. Let's see. So, 96. There were 31 dynasties spanning from around 3100 BCE to 332 BCE. However, much of that history was lost. Quote. So, the basis of Egyptian chronologically is The Lost History of Egypt by Manetho. Ptolemy Philadelphus, king of Egypt in the 3rd century BC, commissioned Manetho, a learned Egyptian priest of the temple of Sebennytus, to write a history of Egypt from the earliest times up to his own day. Unfortunately, the greater part of this history was lost in the destruction of the Alexandrian library. I thought that was significant, and I don't know if you guys have heard of the Alexandrian library, but it was at that time, had a tremendous amount of volumes of information from ancient history that they had preserved. Okay, and so moving on to
I think a lot of those information you're talking about is in the Vatican.
Oh my gosh, bro!
believe
You
that
took the
as well.
words right out my
I
mouth.
believe that as well.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
I believe that as well.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna
Yeah.
move along to I believe you said his name is Hufu, one of history's most dominating personalities, and so he's also known as Cheops. It was Egypt's first golden age, Cheops was the second pharaoh of Egypt's fourth dynasty. His full name is Hanum Hufu, meaning Hanum protects me. He ruled from 2589 BC to 2566 BC. He is significant because he commissioned the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is considered one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. Um, the building of the building of the Great Pyramid is, to me, mathematical brilliance. Um, One question that seems to arise, about the building of the pyramids was it built by slaves? Uh, Quote, bear with me here, gentlemen. Bear with me here. Was it built by slaves? And so, where's it at? 103. Hold on, 103. Built by slaves. So, Pharaoh Khufu has been pictured by certain modern historians as a despot who employed slave labor to erect his colossal pyramid. But this opinion is most certainly erroneous, for slavery was practically unknown in Egypt. It seems that, on the whole, a modern history observes slavery never attained the serious and infamous proportions that it had in Greece or in Italy. Another question that arises is how many people did it take and how long did it take? And so I thought that this is good too. So the building of the Great Pyramid was a great and well organized project. 100,000 men were employed 3 months at a time in transporting the rock to the construction site. Now, I looked this up online, and so it says, it doesn't say 100,000, but it says that it took 3,300 people to build the pyramid. Now, it took them 10 years to build the causeway, and that means the roads and stuff to be able to transport that. But it took them another 20 years to build the pyramid itself. So, there's definitely a huge discrepancy there. In the book, it says 100,000 men for every 3 months versus 3,300 men in total to build that for 20 years. If there were 3,300 men for 20 years to build the Great Pyramid of Giza, they would have to have been phenomenal human beings to move.
I'm
That
telling
would have
you.
been
Yeah.
phenomenal.
The Anunnaki.
I mean, yeah, yeah,
That
yeah.
pyramid was long there.
Telling you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And so 106, let's go here. So I'm moving quite along here. I mean, there's a bunch of information in this chapter. So on here, okay. So uh, from 4163 to 3554 BC, Egypt was in turmoil until a nobleman from Thebes named Entel became the first king of the 11th dynasty, which started the Middle Kingdom. Before this was the Old Kingdom, which I was making reference to earlier. During this time, the kingdom expanded and increased their boundaries. Let's see. And so Imhotep, as Huru had spoken about him, was he was a very prominent figure in Egypt as well. And so I'm going to quote here, before taking leave of the Pyramid Age, we must say something about Imhotep, the architect who designed the first pyramid. This truly great man, besides becoming an architect, was vizier, prime minister to King Zoser of the Third Dynasty. In addition, he was an astronomer, a musician, and held the post of chief physician to the monarch. In later days, he was deified and became a god of medicine. There were many buildings and temples made in his honor. Um, he was considered a very, very outstanding individual during those times. Let's see. In 1782 BC, the Hyksos, or Shepherd Kings, invaded and conquered Egypt. Coincidentally, with the decline of the Middle Age at the same time. They introduced a horse and chariot into composite bow and improved metal weapons. They ruled Egypt during the 15th, 16th, and 17th dynasties, covering 150 years. They were expelled from Thebes by Amhos I, who founded the 18th dynasty. This was considered the New Kingdom. The kingdom enjoyed much prosperity and growth during this time. Um, There's also mention of King Tut, which I'm sure most of us have heard of him. He was a young king, but he did a lot of good things during his reign, although it was short. You know, the career of King Tut was cut short by his untimely death at the age of 17 years old. And so there's also mention of Moses. Moses in here, and I thought that was we've heard about him before. You know, he's a biblical icon, you know, in the Bible, and you know, as we are starting to see about Moses, that he he definitely passed through the mysteries of the Egyptians. He was taught by them, you know, and so just to read this little part right here from about Moses. Although the monotheistic Anton cult was crushed in Egypt, it did not perish altogether, for there was a young Egyptian priest named Moshe Moses who had received his theological education at Heliopolis and who became a disciple at Icon Anton. When Antonism was suppressed in Egypt, Moses led a group of heretics out of the country and into Palestine. Our authority for the statement that Moses was an Egyptian priest is the historian Manetho, who we believe to be a reliable witness. The opinion of Manetho is endorsed by Strabo, who refers to Moses, who was one of the Egyptian priests, taught his followers that it was an egregious era to represent the deity under any form of animals such as the Egyptians did, or in the shape of a man, or as was the practice of Greeks and Africans. It is for this reason that rejecting every species of images and idols, Moses wished the deity to be worshipped without emblems, and according to his proper nature, and accordingly ordered a temple worthy of him to be erected. So I wanted to, you know, just reading that part there because it brings to fact about the Ten Commandments. You know, so you know, was there really a Ten Commandments, or was as it was just I just read here about the not the worshiping of images and other idols? That was from what this is saying. That was his directive. That was his directive. Very
Well,
curious.
you know, we had the 42 laws of Mayat. You know what I mean?
42 laws. That's right.
Yeah, 42 laws of Mayat, and some of the 10 commandments were, you know, pulled from the 42 laws of Mayat.
That's true.
Yeah, you know, and they even state that Moses might have been a Lodge brother as well too. You know, that the mysteries itself. You know, Church Ward gives a really good, wonderful breakdown of talking about masonry and how it's approximately 600,000 years old, and how that anybody who had any type of knowledge were part of those particular mysteries. Which again, it wasn't called masonry at that particular time, but it you know, if you had some type of knowledge, it was esoteric.
That's right.
The Gnostics.
That's right.
Yeah, yes sir.
That's right. All right. Let's see. From the 19th century
I
to
mean,
the 20th. Hello.
I was saying the
From
Gnostic cross,
1990
you know, comes from Egypt.
from the 19th dynasty to the 26th dynasty, you have some iconic figures such as Ramses II, his queen Nefertiti, among others, to rule Egypt. The time frame was 1454 to 325 BC. The last African pharaoh to reign in Egypt was Amhos II from 569 to 525 BC. So the decline of the ancient Egypt began around 1100 BC due to the political instability of foreign invasions and environmental changes. The final blow was in 332 BC when Egypt was invaded by the Greeks, Alexander the Great. After his death, built in his honor was the city of Alexandria. The glories of Alexandria were the Great Museum and the Great Library, which had a running total of over 400,000 volumes. After 10 years, the museum began to decline. However, the Great Library survived until it was burned by the Roman army led by Julius Caesar. The Romans tried to destroy the Great Library, but it was destroyed by fanatical Christian monks in 389 AD. There were many great inventions by the Egyptians, such as the alphabet, paper, ink, and the pen. Another great invention was the calendar. You know, the calendar, the mathematical and astronomical effort that is put into that thing is just phenomenal. I mean, there's certainly more research to be done on that. I didn't get all into it, just to give you a brief overview of what the things they committed, but it's fascinating,
Yeah.
fascinating. You know,
Yeah.
so in the pantheon of ancient Greek, there are numerous deities. You have the moon god Thoth, which means the measurer. He is also known as Hermes Trismegistus. You have Ra, Osiris, Horus, Aman or Aman, Ptah, Mandu, Seb, and Iris. There's a great story pertaining to Ra, Thoth, Seb, Osiris, and Isis, which has to do with the death and the resurrection of Osiris. It's a good story that they really get into in this book that Mr. Jackson puts in here. It's very good, very good.
Right.
And so also too, hold on here. Let me look at it. There's also the zodiac again. So the zodiac, another phase of the myths, rites, and religious belief, the ancient Egyptians, which we must consider briefly, is the complex of astrotheology exemplified by the symbolism of the zodiac. You know, the zodiac signs are also in the okay. Thought we clicked out there. So the zodiac is implemented or implicated in so many things. You know, uh, it has to do, and I didn't know this. It's intertwined. Well, hold on. Let me read this paragraph. Hold on. The zodiac is an imaginary band encircling the celestial sphere, stretching 8 degrees on each side of the ecliptic, the apparent path of the sun. The zodiac is divided into 12 sections, each corresponding to 1 month. The signs and constellations were originally the same, but due to the precession of the equinoxes, each sign moves westward until the next constellation is about 2155 years. A sign, therefore, makes a complete circuit of the heavens in about 26,000 years. The constellations of the zodiac have the following names: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. It is also intertwined with the mythical legend of Hercules. And I didn't know that, but his 12 labors that he has to perform is based on the zodiac. It's based on the zodiac. I thought that was very interesting. I didn't know that. And so it also, with the zodiac, you know, it is also intertwined with the Bible as well. Um, so let's see here. Let me see
12
here.
disciples.
Intertwined with the Bibles as well. So where did that go? Hold on. Bear with me. Bear with me. But a lot, what is that? A lot of the names, hold on. Where is that at? Bear with me, gentlemen. Okay, so here. Move along here. Where is that? Okay, I can't find it. Okay, here it is. The same sky gods are referred to in the Bible more than once, although the symbols are different, but they were called cherubim. It also is intertwined with the vernal equinox, the summer solstice, the autumnal equinox, the winter solstice. It also is intertwined with horoscopes. It's also intertwined with the birth of Jesus.
Right.
It speaks of speaks of the where is that at here? It is also intertwined with the Passover as well as the zodiac. Let's see here. Uh, you know, astronomically and mathematically, as I said before, the brilliance in figuring out these scenarios to me is just unbelievable, unbelievable. And so, just a few more points here. Uh, I want to talk about Carthage. Carthage was one of the great African city-states of the ancient world, and it is one of the tragedies of history that after the Punic Wars waged the Romans, Carthage was finally destroyed. And the reason why I talk about them is because just as in Alexandria, they also too had a great library with numerous, over hundreds of thousands of volumes. And the reason why I mention that is because you take Alexandria, and I believe I mentioned another one before this, but also this one as well. The wealth of knowledge that has been destroyed, and as we have read about, the same thing was applied in religion as well. If they couldn't include it into their religion to make it make sense, they destroyed it. And so the same thing happens with these libraries. I mean, this is ancient technology from highly advanced civilizations that we will never know. And that's part of the problem with antiquity, because, sure, we have these archaeological digs and we find things, this and that and the other, but at best, it's just our best educated guesses on this, because the problem with it is that we don't know for sure, because most of that stuff has been destroyed for sure. And so, a couple more things here. So, I want to read
Right.
this part.
I was going to say,
I wanna read
I
that.
believe that wars and stuff, a lot of wars have been started to block the discovery of these things, that we have discovered them and they're keeping them secret.
Sure, 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 sure. Got a couple more things here, and then I'll be done. And so, many of the problems and puzzles of history could be cleared up. If we could only get over the absurd propaganda that Africa, for some strange reason and mysterious reason, have ages been cut off from the rest of the world. If this were so, how is it that the great nations of both ancient and modern times have worshipped black gods and embraced religious systems of African origin? And so I want to read this by Mr. Geoffrey Higgins here. In my search into the origin of the ancient Druids, I continually found at last that my labors terminated with something black. Osiris and the bull were black. All the gods and goddesses of Greece were black. At least this was the case with Jupiter, Bacchus, Hercules, Apollo, Amemnon. The goddesses, Venus, Isis, Hecate, Diana, Juno, Metis, Ceres, Sybil, are black. If the reader doubt my word, he may go to the Cathedral of Moulins, the Virgin at Loreto, the Church of Ananicia, the Church of Saint Lazaro, the Church of Saint Stephen, Saint Francisco at Pisa, the Church of Brixton in Tyrol, at the Padilla, to the Church of Saint Theodore in Munich, to the church and Cathedral of Habsburg, to Rome, to the Borgosi Chapel Maria Maggiore, to the Pantheon, to the Chapel of St. Peter's. I mean, it's just so much, and yet, all as Chris has made mention to is, how this stuff is being hidden. And just one more thing here, and I'll be done. This is from the appendix. It may be of interest to the reader to know that the ancient Egyptians did not call themselves Egyptians. The name was invented by the Greeks. The African land they called their country called Kim, or Cam or Ham, which literally meant the black land. And they called themselves Hemi, Kamites, or Hamites, meaning the black people.
Yes, sir.
And that's what I
Wonderful.
have for chapter 3.
Wonderful.
One of the first Jews right there.
That was a lot. Yeah.
Oh, what'd you
Yeah.
say? I didn't hear you.
Phenomenal. I said he's talking about the Hamites, and those are some of your original Jews.
Yeah, yeah. Church Wars got a. He goes mean on them Jews in his book. He kind of.
Yes, he does.
We're gonna get on that discussion some other time. But yeah, he kind of debunks their story. In a sense.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's interesting. All right, Robert.
That was a great job, gentlemen. That was a great job. A lot of information. Everybody did a great job tonight. One thing I will say, taking this journey, certainly from the religion statue that we took, and also just in this first book, to me, the further that we go back, the blacker that it is. And there's just no denying that. There's no intent or shot at anybody. It's just the truth. And
You're
to
100% right. We were all originally black.
yeah, you know, so the the willful intent to try to hide that, you know, it's it's just wild to me. I mean, I understand why. I understand why to fit their narrative, but that's no longer becoming the case. It is certainly getting out there, and we are certainly a part of that engine of putting it out there. You know, it is the truth.
So you're interested in the Anunnaki and some of that stuff,
Oh yeah,
Rob?
oh yeah.
And you want to talk about
Yes.
that for a sec? Since we're talking about civilizations and the origin, and
Go ahead, go ahead.
like where like Caucasians, Europeans, Asians, and all that comes from. Now, this is just my opinion, maybe a theory. It's not. I don't think there's ever a way we can be able to prove this, but maybe in the future.
Sure.
You know the Bible story of Babylon, the Tower of Babel. I mean, the Tower of Babel, and that we built that. Those people built that tower, reaching to heaven for God, and then God came down and separated all of them. Well, another theory is that was us, the original humans that were black or dark skinned at that time, and you know the Anunnaki, or the people that were in control of us. We were united and we were becoming strong. And that tower was, I don't even know if it was a tower. That's just what the Bible says. But to me, that's more of a symbol of the unification we had and the power that we had, and the people, the Anunnaki, were afraid of that, and that the reason why we all have different cultures is perhaps that the Anunnaki came down and actually separated us and took our DNA and made very, very minor changes, just so, and then we started off with nothing, so we thought we're separate, if that makes sense. I know it's a wild idea, but I mean, if they created us and we were going to revolt and we were revolting, split us apart.
So you know, and I've heard that. So you know, I've heard this theory too as well. So to what you were saying, that they were afraid of us. You know, they created us. Now, not all of them wanted us to be created, you know, in their image, so to speak. But it happened anyway, and so the thing that they were afraid of, you know, because they were considered gods or were gods, and so you know they were already there. What made them nervous about us, from my understanding, is that we had the potential to become more powerful than them, because we could live here, but we could also ascend to where they were, which would make us more powerful than them. And so they were afraid of that. And to what you're talking about when you were talking about the chromosomes, and how that is not you know, this has supposedly happened I believe 200-300 years ago, that happened, the fusion, because it's not something that's man-made. It's something that happened a long time ago, and so there is a theory that they are the reason behind that. You know, there's also that we had the capability of living a long time, you know, but there were certain things that were done to where now we can only, our lifespan is the most 120 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Well,
at
the
best.
evidence for that shows up in the book of Genesis. In Genesis, the Noah, I mean, the scripture says that I will make number man to his days to 120 years. You can believe that as religion, that God came down and was like, oh, you're not going to live any more than 120
Right.
years. Or that
Right.
was the Anunnaki or something that we don't understand, that actually did change our DNA to where we can't live longer. Or another explanation for that is, you know, after the flood, we didn't have the vegetation, so the oxygen level on the earth went down, and that's why we don't live as long, because we don't have as much oxygen.
That's true. That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Because everyone lived longer
very
before the flood, man. I mean, in
Yeah.
the Bible, we have all that those accounts of people living 700, 800, 900 years old, and then boom, the flood happens, wipes everything out, and the next thing you know, we're dying earlier.
Yeah, I think the concept of time, and I know we need to get off. I know we kind of over already, but I think the concept of time and celebrating birthdays and stuff like that, even the Gregorian calendar, is part of our deception. I feel like that, we talked about the separation. I really believe man created that by all means. I do. Even when we go to the counts of, what was it, 322, 325 Council of Nicaea, when
Yeah.
Constantine, decides to make, Christ a legitimate thing, even though he didn't believe it himself. You know what I mean? But men use stuff to build their justification of what they do. Even when we look into different religions, it's based upon, if I want to have multiple wives, I'm going to choose this particular religion. You know what I mean? If so I feel like, man, I wouldn't want to believe our creators would deceive us like that. You know what I mean? And that just depends even to who you believe in. You know what I mean? When
Right.
you think about Edward Church, he goes into a plantology, and we come from plants, and then become this and that. If you go from Alfred Sherwood Romer, he talks about the blob we possibly came from, and building a vertebrate over time, over millions of years. So there's so many theories of how we were created. You know what I mean? But I would want to believe, just through the deception of man, that they're the ones who've been. I mean, I feel like we're constantly being manipulated. To this day. And I believe that because of man's views and values. Even when it comes down to religion, even our church ward book, we discussed how, if your religion itself causes you to kill others, how powerful really is it? You know what I mean? If you have to kill other people in order to influence them, how powerful really is your God? You know what I mean? So I don't want to get too much into it, because I know me, Chris, Corey, and Raw RP, we'll be on this conversation for another 2 hours.
Oh,
But
yeah.
we want to invite people in. We're reading this book. We just give people enough so they can start reading the book themselves. But we're going to give you something every week to encourage you to bring more knowledge to yourself and expand your way of thinking. We love everybody. We appreciate everybody. Brothers, y'all did a wonderful job. I thank you.
Haru, you got a spotlight on somebody beautiful
I
this
do
evening?
have the spotlight. I sure do have the spotlight. Spotlight tonight is going to be Henrietta Swan Leavitt. Okay, I've heard the name before, but very vague. So I wanted to bring that into the spotlight. Born 1868, died 1921. Her field was astronomy. Some scientists win fame. Others change humanity's understanding of the universe quietly. Henrietta is one of the most important astronomers in history, yet most people have never heard of her. Without her work, we would not know how big the universe is. In the early 1900s, Henrietta worked at the Harvard College Observatory. She was hired as a computer, not a machine, but a human calculator. At the time, women were often employed and analyzed astronomy data, but were rarely credited as scientists. She was paid far less than male astronomers. Henrietta studied variable stars whose brightness changed over time. While examining stars in a small magnetic cloud, she made a stunning discovery. The brighter the Kepler variable star, the longer its period of brightness variation. This became known as the period luminous relationship. It sounds technical, but it changed everything. Why it matters. Because of Henrietta's discovery, astronomers could measure distance to far away galaxies, determine the universe extends far beyond the Milky Way, lay the groundwork for modern cosmology. So she was an important figure in the 1900s, as we would know. And let's see, Henrietta never received a Nobel Prize, rarely received public recognition during her lifetime, and worked under male supervision, often got institutionally credited. She died in 1921 before fully impact of her discovery was widely recognized. Why she was overlooked, well, we already know. We reading stuff now because of why people are overlooked. But she was overlooked, but she was an astronomer that brought the light to things and was able to allow other astronomers to calculate the distance of our universe and beyond the Milky Way. So Henrietta Swan Leavitt is our spotlight for tonight. Thank you.
Right on.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. All right, Kings. This was another great episode. Another great episode, as Farouk just touched on. We encourage your likes, your thoughts, your suggestions, and your questions in the comments section. Please join us and let us know what you think. So Tuesday we got coming up open mic night. Looking forward to that as well. Everybody did a great job tonight, Kings. Great job tonight. Until Tuesday.
Love you, brothers.